All right, guys. Welcome to our first. I guess it's not really our first, but our new community meetings. We're going to be having these weekly to discuss kind of what's going on with the FPVFC, but more importantly, what's going on out in the grand wide world of the FAA and what we're working on in that respect. So, and a big part of this is going to be open discussion uh, about some of the, for lack of a better term, pain points at which we're all experiencing in the hobby. So I do ask that you guys chime in whenever you feel you got something to say, and that way we can kind of understand where you guys are at and what we need to do to go forward. Um, so if there's any questions on that, feel free to hit me up. You can type in the chat. You can just chime in whenever you want. There's not any kind of format that we're going to be adhering to a certain time for any questions after the presentation or anything like that. And I'd like to keep this as fluid as possible. So first off, I'd like to, it's been a while since we've kind of let the community know where we're at. So right now, we are filed for our 501c3. We are waiting on a response back on that, and with the government shutdown, obviously there's bound to be some delays with that. So once we get that, we can move on to the road of petitioning to become a community-based organization through which we can interact with the FAA on a more I guess peer-to-peer level. So that's the big news. A couple things that we've got going on besides that. We've got we just opened up actually Stymie here opened up our different social media accounts. So we have Pinterest, Twitter. We even have a Twitch stream now. So hopefully we'll get that moving forward here pretty quick, and maybe we can do some of these meetings in a Twitch format. We've got obviously the Facebook channel, and let's see what else. We've got some fundraising merch that will shortly be available after we become a 501c3. The website will launch alongside of that, and there's a huge repository of knowledge that we've been working on on the website to help you guys out. So that's pretty much where we're at this point. And we've also identified some collaboration points through which we think we can make an impact for the hobby. And I want to cover those real quick, and I can go into those on a much greater detail, as we do more and more of these meetings. But we've kind of organized this in a way that we can identify the upcoming deadlines as put forth in the new FAA reauthorization, and kind of hit those on a case-by-case basis as those deadlines come up. So a couple of them obviously is going to be remote identification policies. And that's going to be the major topic of our discussion tonight is remote ID. And there's a reason for that, which I'll get into here in a little bit. We want to help develop the knowledge test through which we know it's coming. We want to make sure that it works for our community, where it's not just a bunch of aeronautical knowledge that we don't use on a day-to-day basis when we fly. We want to make sure it's actually relevant for our hobby. We have an upcoming identification of no-fly zones in which the FAA is going to deem certain areas off limits for flight, and the majority of those are probably going to be like facilities like power generation facilities, water treatment facilities, government locations like Air Force bases and whatnot, stadiums when they're occupied, that kind of stuff. But we want to kind of partner with them to make sure that they're not overly marginalizing our airspace. Another one would be flight limitations, determining the FAA is bound to set forth rules on what safe operations are with multi-rotors, with fixed-wing aircraft. How fast can they go? Obviously, altitude is one we want to kind of tackle. Beyond visual line of sight, what's that going to take for us to be able to do that legally? Are there going to be exceptions for racing, for quad racing or fixed wing racing? Spotters is going to be in there. Another one would be enforcement and law enforcement education, making sure that the people who I'm sure the FAA is going to be leaning on to enforce their rules, making sure they're informed and helping to educate those folks. A big one for me, and I know for a lot of people, is realistic data collection on UAS sightings, making sure that there's a way for Stymie, can you help Poor Sport to jump in? Anyway, back on this, making sure that the FAA and the people who are reporting drone sightings, and I do that with air quotes here, making sure that they're reporting this stuff factually and that they're not just saying it's a drone because somebody saw something in the sky. We've all seen the meme where a plastic bag is floating in the sky and we're calling it a drone. So a way for them to truthfully say that a drone was sighted where it shouldn't have been. Another big one for flight and flight restrictions would be privacy. A lot of states right now are looking at privacy laws in terms of drones. So making sure that we kind of nip that in the bud as much as possible. Educational programs for the community. One of the big things that we've kind of thought about, and we're still trying to put it together, would be being able having a way for the community to respond to public safety threats, a way that we can volunteer with local law enforcement, that we can help out in terms of could be a way for us to be able to help out during wildfires and floods and whatnot. But even more so, let's look at Gatwick. Had that been a drone, what can we do to help mitigate issues like that? If we're responding, if the community is responding to those events, then it casts a positive light on something that would be a negative. So that's kind of the stuff that we're identifying that we can help work with the FAA on. I think that's a pretty big deal. And I think that we can definitely make an impact for those areas for the community. So anywho, one of the big points that I wanted to cover today was the topic of remote ID. And I want to talk about that because there's a lot of upcoming changes that will happen based on the development of remote ID. So one of the big ones, if anybody's familiar with, and I'm going to drop in this real quick. Give me 1 second. In that link, you're going to find these are all the recent UAS initiatives from the FAA website. And 2 of them are going to be the operation of small unmanned aircraft over people and safe and secure operations of small unmanned aircraft. And the 2 of these are reliant on remote ID. In other words, they are not going to allow this stuff to happen without remote ID being a distinct possibility. So on the topic of remote ID, talk to me about where you guys feel like. And Dave, you chiming in?
Yeah, I was just going to add that those all of the those new rules that Josh just pointed out are for 107 operators. So what we're seeing is a focus from the FAA on 107 certificate holders, and then they're yielding privileges to those folks. So we see that this is the focus that the FAA is starting also for the remote identification RFI that they've put out.
When you say remote ID, maybe we want to jump back a little bit and try to explain in more detail exactly what that is and why it's come up so much.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So obviously, remote ID is going to be a way for. Well, let me jump back a little further. So the FAA is developing unmanned or UAS traffic management. It's a way. It's similar to air traffic controllers, where they can track what drones are in the air, where they're going, what they're doing, that kind of thing. Now, for the essence of beyond visual line of sight, remote ID is something that they're deeming necessary. And this comes into play especially for the Amazons and the Walmarts and these people that want to do deliveries via drone. Now, these commercial entities would put remote ID in their units when they want to do this delivery kind of stuff, or it could even come down to for 107 pilots when they're doing their photography, they're doing their real estate work, they're mapping land, they're doing agricultural kind of stuff, so that they can track where these unmanned aircraft are, and they can notify others to, or notify general aviation aircraft to stay out of the way, or whatever the case may be. So yes, these NPRMs are for 107, but on the flip side, I think that with these changes to 107, we're going to start seeing some of these changes roll out to the hobby airspace too. So Dave?
Yeah, no, I agree completely, and that's to me the direction that that it looks like is that FAA is giving privileges to 107 accredited operators, and there's a view that the hobbyists currently under Section 349 are going to be falling under more and more 107 requirements. So,
Anybody else?
Have they actually said what they're going to use for some kind of tags? That, I mean, how is it? I don't understand. If stuff that's so small and has such like a low lift capacity or weight capacity, I mean, what do they expect that's going to travel over tons and tons of miles? Is it just something that's similar to a beacon on like a general aviation?
So right now, one of the big things that's going on is there's a bunch of, and Dave can probably speak a little bit more about this. There's a bunch of companies that are competing for basically a government contract for remote identification. And Dave, can you chime in a little more on that for me?
I can. There are two technologies that there was an RFI that was due to the FFA on February 4. They gave 60 days for it, and there are two competing technologies that have been submitted that we're aware of. We don't know what all was submitted as of February 4th, but we do know at least these two. And the two DJI is advocating more of a transponder type of device that communicates information only to authorities, and they're interested in that so that they are not subjecting their customers to broad-based information from people who are angry that there's a phantom flying over their house, and then the combination of Wing, the Google or Alphabet company, AirMap, and Kitty Hawk have put together a network-based capability that has if you just look on Google what Wing is doing, you can see their technology, and they're calling it Inter-USS, and so that's a capability that has more the information stays with the network for some period of time. So a different type of technology, but one in all instances, or I should, starting over, all instances are or capabilities that will be outsourced from the FAA. So they will be communicating with air traffic control, but they will be separate in the sense that there'll be pockets that will be run across the country.
And a quick breakdown would be the major difference is the one that's being advocated for by DJI is private, available only to law enforcement, while as the one by Kitty Hawk and AirMap and what was the other one?
Wing.
Wing, yes. That one is not necessarily as private. It's going to be open to the general public for them to be able to see.
Right.
So there's a little bit of a lack of privacy there. And again, this is for commercial. This is, Part 107, and these are going to be for these commercial entities, but that doesn't preclude the FAA's ability to roll something similar like that out to the hobby community. So go ahead.
All right. No, I'm just I'm not so much worried about the privacy aspect of it on our end. I mean, we're gonna kind of have to worry about that anyways. Really, I guess at that point, even if you have your 107, I mean, people can go and find out if you have it. I'm more worried about as far as interference or anything like that. I mean, if it's a transponder, it's putting out some kind of a frequency, and what's that going to do for everything else that we have going on electrical wise?
That's a fair point, and definitely one that needs to be considered. I think it all determines on what kind of technology they are going to use and what kind of signals they're going to be broadcasting. If they're generally, we're already operating, and I use this loosely, but most people are already operating on 5.8 and 2.4. If we're talking about in the lower megahertz, then we should be okay. But again, there's going to need to be some testing on that kind of stuff. So,
and DJI is advocating an idea that was brought up in our discussions, which was interleaving packets of data that in the metadata. It's the position that we want to take forward to the FAA is one in progression. One where the first is we would like to continue the section 349 that allows for an exception to remote identification to hobbyist. And if that doesn't happen, then we would like to minimize the amount of private information that we're communicating. Certainly create things like categories, like this is a hobbyist UAS, this is a commercial UAS, this is a law enforcement UAS, so that type of information could be available publicly. So we're trying to do this in a stepwise manner in terms of the FPVFC position that we take forward.
And ideally, if we could reuse the existing equipment we have to broadcast those signals so there's no additional cost or weight or anything like that, that would be even better.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, it's not like we don't have enough view arts to put something else on.
Right.
I almost think that we should almost advocate for it now to do it instead of letting them come to the hobbyist and say, this is what you have to do.
Oh, without a doubt. And to that end, in order to represent a group under the national airspace, we need to be a community-based organization. In order to be in a community-based organization, you have to be an IRS-approved, a nonprofit organization. So that's exactly what we're doing, and that's what Josh was talking about earlier, that we've submitted the 501c3 application. So then the idea is to go to the FAA in a number of different points, a number of different individuals, one being the Drone Advisory Committee, and offer the information and things that we've got in hand, such as in the 2018 reauthorization, there was a statement about that in order to for a pilot to operate under a CBO, there has to be a knowledge exam. So we're assembling an exam so that we bring to the table a position, a view, something helpful and collaborative, and then we're hopeful that we can start the discussion on a number of points that that Josh was touching on in terms of the various points of collaboration with the FAA. So absolutely agree to be proactive, not reactive.
And we've come up with a couple ideas, and granted, they are right now they are ideas of ways that we can reuse existing technologies to kind of act as a lower form of remote identification, one that protects privacy um, and and really only is relevant in the case of an emergency in which law enforcement needs to identify a drone, or you know um, there's some kind of issue, they can locate either the drone or the operator, and I think they're both feasible ideas. I think both the ideas are very feasible, but it still warrants some further development. But it's an idea that we can come to the FAA and say, first off, we want to be excluded from remote ID. Barring that, if we have to utilize some form of remote ID, we're going to posit these forward and say, this works as a lower form using existing technology that doesn't need to. We don't need to add anything to an already taxed aircraft. We don't need to add weight. We don't need to add any more technology beyond doing a firmware update. So that's some of the ideas we've got. I don't want to dive deep into it just yet, but I think we've got, and that's where Dave was going with the progression. We've got, okay, first we're going to do this, then we've got these ideas, so that we're not adding, number one, a cost burden to the community, and number two, something else that we got to add, that we have to add, and you have to have one of these for every aircraft you want to fly. And do you want to just hot swap them, or do you want to have one for every aircraft? And again, that becomes a cost burden. So, just a couple ideas on that. So, any other thoughts?
Have there been any questions or any sort of conversations about the underlying infrastructure that would be needed to support something like this? When you talk about, sending data around through the air, you have to have a fairly wide net of receiving towers or beings of some sort to take in that information in order to aggregate it.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that they have been testing, and there's been live tests, I know, in England that we were kind of watching, of the UTM network, where they were tracking drones, doing their thing, going on deliveries and flying about, and and a lot of that is being privatized. So there are companies that are developing UTM facilities around the United States to help mitigate some of that for the FAA.
And so you're right on point with that question with respect to the two competing ideas about the unmanned traffic management, which is the network, which would necessitate some level of database and storage. And the word that was missing me earlier was persistence of the data. So how long do you want to retain this information of a UAS flight? And that's where I would rather have a transponder, then it broadcasts their local devices. You can, if you're law enforcement, you can pick it up. And of course, they're thinking of their own equipment, the DJI scope, and which is positive from a perspective of limiting the persistence. And then exactly to your point, which is the necessity of a managing, if not an entire one network for the entire country, multiple grids that would pick up locales. So yeah, fair amount, and that's a lot of this is what's contained in the request for information that the FAA put out with a due date of this past February 4.
I got a kind of an idea that could be put out, I guess. We're flying stuff that's pretty much under let's say, what about just giving the idea, okay, if somebody's out here, why not just have a label, and all you do is just hit a band scanner, and it'll pick up the channel. You could see exactly where they are, and then just require a head on it so they can say, okay, that's this person. It's that. It's it's right there on the OSD. We can see it on the video. We can see exactly where they are, where they're flying, what they're doing.
I think the desire is to go one step further, and that is to be able to have the operator identify either themselves or the device. And so this is from as we've been reminded, there are two aspects that the FAA is always thinking about: one, security, and the other, safety. And so this is absolutely in the safety realm that they want to know, who's operating this, and to that end, interleaving the information in an existing data stream would be, as Dan was citing, low cost from our perspective, and would be able to embed it in existing bandwidth.
One of the
I
ideas.
mean,
Oh, go ahead.
I feel.
Go ahead, bud.
No, I was just saying, like the thing with they're required to all have OSD. That would be nothing substantially different that we're going to be flying, and that's why I kind of thought it would be a good idea, because if you have OSD, all you have to do put in on the OSD, they look it up, they can see it, and they can see it in real time. So that way, if there is an issue, you can, it'd be something that it's traceable. All they're looking for is that, and like a video signal just go in the area. I mean, within half a mile of where the person's flying, as long as you don't have like a garbage ground station, which I don't see that being an issue. Yeah, I know I'm roboting probably. So.
That's all right, bud. It's coming across. So let me cover a couple of the options that we thought of. Dan 507, he had his idea was to utilize it's called the Line 21 captions, right, Dan?
Yeah, I think that's one of the names for it, but it's easier just to call it what's used in old-fashioned TVs for closed captioning.
And his idea was to embed our signals, and it could be so much as your call sign, your pilot call sign, could be your FAA registration number, your ham license if necessary, embed that in the closed captioning signal, and that would be able to be picked up by thank you, Dan. Be able to be picked up by simple technology that law enforcement could use, and it would broadcast only in a very small locale, and that would, if there's an issue in your immediate area, which is the only reason that we would need, for the most part, remote ID if we're staying under a 4-foot or 400-foot altitude. That they would be able to identify the pilot via their call sign, their FAA registration, etc. The other option was to embed I call it a non-unique identifier. Basically, it's just going to identify, kind of like Dave was saying earlier, it's going to identify a category. This is a hobbyist drone. This is a law enforcement drone. This is a commercial drone, etc. And it would embed those in both the VTX data stream, in some of the data that's, just embedding it in some of the extra data in there. And it would also embed it in the radio transmitter, your actual controller, so that it will both transmit from the actual aircraft, and it'll transmit from your remote. And that way, if there's an issue, law enforcement will be able to say, okay, there's a drone over there, let's figure out what type it is. So it would come back as a hobbyist or whatever, and they'd be able to see where the drone is. They'd be able to locate the drone. They'd be able to locate the operator. If there's some kind of issue, they'd be able to go to that operator, have them land the aircraft, and move on with life. It's that simple. So these are some of our different ideas. for that. What are your thoughts on those?
And also,
my only thought would be that perhaps the 5.8 band and 2.4 bands are probably going to be a little too short in wavelength. When you look at cell phones, for example, they operate around the 800 megahertz range. So, and they have enough, I guess, distance to get them. Hang on one moment. They have enough wavelength to get them a fairly good distance, but you still have to have a fairly robust infrastructure to support, tracking something reliably at 800 megahertz. Like if you get to 5.8, you're going to have to increase the number of stations or towers or whatever it is that's going to be sensing these things. Otherwise, everybody's going to be off the radar completely.
I think they're mostly concerned about sensing them in specific areas. So there would be a handful of sensors around an airport, and they wouldn't care if you're flying in Class G airspace at all. So in that case, you wouldn't have to have the signal travel all that far. It's just if you're too close to an airport or something, then they would be able to detect you, or somewhere else you're not supposed to be.
Anybody else? Any thoughts?
I'd also like to say that I do agree with what Gravy said, and I thought about that a bit in the past too with the OSD and putting more information in there. And that's another thing. If we're thinking about going in different steps, a super simple step would be adding more information to our existing OSDs. We could ask Betaflight to add another placeholder. So most people stick their pilot handle in one spot. There may be another spot for a registration number or a third spot for other information so that you could rearrange it in your OSD how you'd like. And that should be real simple to get that added.
Absolutely. It's not a bad idea at all. All right. So now, big part of this obviously is, and here's what I want people's thoughts on. What are your oppositions to remote identification? What would say absolutely not? I'm not putting this on my aircraft. What would be your opposition to that, and why?
Operator error on the person doing the tracking, not the flying. It'd be pretty easy to mix up a letter or a number, and all of a sudden somebody's getting the feds at their house for doing something wrong when they weren't even out there at that time. I mean, if you're picking up something and you're tracking it, and all of a sudden one number is off, like let's take Gatwick for instance. If that was somebody flying a drone and they were out there messing around and the RFID tag or whatever wasn't exactly correct, they went after the wrong person. So that could be pretty tough to get ironed out, and it might make some case law or it might take some case law to actually get it working right, and that's really unfair to anybody that flies.
Okay, fair enough. Anybody else?
My first concern is that it would be an expensive piece of equipment that would be fairly large and hard to install on our little tiny guys.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Yeah, they are at least depending on. Now it also depends on what type they do require us to have. I know in terms of ADS-B, they do have transponders. They run about 5 grams in weight, so they're fairly small and light, but they do run in the $200-$250 range. Now, if we go with existing technology, obviously that's not an issue, but it really depends on what type they require us to use. Dave?
I was picking up on the prior thought. That's the notion that so pardon me for cycling back, but if the operator error causes a problem and you get law enforcement knocking at your door, the burden of proof then becomes very difficult, and because we're proving a negative, and it's like, no, honest, I wasn't transmitting, my gear wasn't transmitting. How do you prove that? And so that's a really good line of thought in terms of operator error, and then following through in terms of any legal action taken against an operator. But the cost of the devices on the next point, key thought, and that's why I applaud Dan's notion of, gosh, if we could embed this in existing kit, that would really help us out.
Any other thoughts? What else would kind of steer you away from remote identification? And on the flip side, what if remote ID came with some extra privileges? Would that help swing you the other direction?
My first thought, since the very first time I heard about remote ID as a possibility, would be using it as what we briefly touched on a second ago, which is like a like it's for it to be like cost prohibitive, like using it as a way to control who's flying by requiring a very expensive piece of equipment, would just snuff out the hobby, or it has the potential to at least snuff out a good portion of flyers. But other than that, for me it would just be privacy. I would have a hard time trusting Google with anything even mildly sensitive.
There's an interesting aspect coming in between the lines as we're reading and researching, and if we listen to the administrator of the FAA, she's keenly interested in the United States having be a place for innovation with UAS. And to me, that's positive, particularly if you look at what just happened in Canada with their remote piloting aircraft legislation that goes in place in June. The European Union has quite a restrictive set of guidelines they've just introduced that they're trying to get a consistent set across the European Union. Australia has just instituted a set of regulations. And so what we're seeing hints about are less regulation than some of the countries around us. And certainly from the administrators on the top of the FAA, as well as Homeland Security, we're being told, we want innovation to flourish. So that to me is a positive for those of us flying in the United States. I'm not going to say it's a panacea, but to me it's at least a little bit of sunshine.
What if we used any kind of remote tracking or whatever they want to do for hobbyists? What if we use that as a bargaining chip and we kind of get back some things that we lost that were important to us? Like, we'll tell you where we're at, but you're going to let us go back to doing this because there was no issue with it, but you thought that there was. And now that you can see us there, you'll see and be able to record data to know that there is no issue.
I think that's kind of the goal, and just to step in for a moment, because really once they have that data and they can start tracking those statistics, then we'll be able to start pushing back on that with hard data to back it up with. And I also just want to make another quick point. I'm personally concerned about spoofing. With remote ID, spoofing becomes an issue, and that can lead to potentially, pilots that are not causing problems being targeted for spoofed IDs. And yeah, so that's just the thought that's on my brain with the whole remote ID. Because overall, it's a great idea. Because personally, I know being close to a military base and restricted airspace, it'd be nice to let them know that I'm not in their airspace. So I am actually for remote ID. It just, it's going to be interesting and kind of problematic to actually implement it at a wide scale.
I would be concerned about the same thing, and it also applies to the regulations about having your registration number on the outside of your drone. Like, what's to stop someone from grabbing your registration number, putting it on their own one?
That's my point. And then you also have the issue with bad actors not even using either or. And if they are going to use either or, they're just going to start spoofing other known good identities in the sky.
I'd also be concerned that it's transmit only and certainly no receive, because that's a slippery slope.
Yeah, there's definitely been discussion on there with remote ID of having it be able to take your aircraft out of the sky and control it and tell it to land and all that stuff too, which we definitely wouldn't be in favor of.
It's
Absolutely not.
probably more dangerous than not controlling it at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because if they're worried about people ditching their quads into a group of people, why not let somebody else do it that can't see what we're even looking at? And while we're going 99.9 miles an hour at 399 feet, yet like just kill it and let that sharp carbon drop wherever. I mean, it will wind up happening if we have receive data and not just transmit.
Those are all fair points. Definitely, I hadn't personally thought of the spoofing, Zoe, so thank you for bringing that up. That's definitely a key point. I think that, going back to, using remote ID as a bargaining chip, yeah, I think, using that to get back some things like maybe being able to go into a different class of airspace or being able to fly in different, better locations or beyond visual line of sight or whatever the case may be, or long range FPV, for Christ's sakes. These are all things that we all want to do and that we all want to experience, but right now regulations prohibit because so I think we can use that. I think it can be used, and that's kind of where I was going with if there were added benefits to using it, what would you be in favor of it? So
And to that end, that's where I see the FAA is making 107 more attractive. So you make it more attractive, more now. So they've got the one of the documents they've issued is flying at night and flying over people. And right now, if you're a 107 pilot, you need a waiver for both of those, as a lot of folks here know. And so no waiver required for either of those instances, but you have to be a 107 pilot. And so that's where to me, the handwriting is, if this is feeling like they want all the hobbyists to migrate eventually to 107 status. And so that's one of the things that we'd like to push back on and say, well, we have section 349, we're a responsible group of hobbyists, and we've got everything that you've been asking for, an exam, a knowledge exam, a set of safety guidelines, a code of conduct. So we want to approach this in a rational manner to be able to negotiate and describe what is sensible for FPV.
So, on that same vein, and kind of coming up to the end of our hour here, and if we need to go longer, we will, but I want to make sure and hit everything. I did post on the FPVFC Facebook site, and then the AMA did post it. I posted it yesterday. FAA posted it today, FAA posted it today, as did the AMA, on requiring your registration number on the outside of your drone. Now, for most of us who fly carbon and everything's external anyway, if you've been doing this, it's not a big deal, but they are requiring it to be on the external visible side so that they don't have to pretty much touch your drone or touch your aircraft or open up a battery compartment or whatever the case may be to find your registration number. And they're doing this, according to them, as a safety measure for first responders. So I am going to drop that real quick into the thing. Now, keep in mind, they're calling this an interim final rule, which means that it's not so much final, but they have opened it up for comments for the next 30 days, which that will end on March 15th, in which they'll accept any public comments on the issue. So if you feel like there's something you want to say about that, then the link I posted will take you right to their website. And I believe, let me see. No, I think that's it on that. Now, the other thing it doesn't mention is how it needs to be marked, or in terms of size or perfect location or anything like that. But there is, and I'm going to post that real quick too.
So that's a difference from, they must have updated it from yesterday. Yesterday they said there's no comment period, and this will be instituted in 10 days. Now the FAA is soliciting input for 30.
For 30 days.
Interesting. They must have gotten a couple of phone calls.
Yeah, they don't have a very good track record of meeting up with their deadlines either.
Mm-hmm.
So it does go live 10 days from now. So we'll be on I believe it goes live on the 23rd. But they are accepting comments on it until March 15th. So,
Okay.
if that clears things up. The second link I posted there was where it needs to be, how it needs to be displayed, and where. So exclude the second, or if you're in that link, exclude the last part of section C there, because it cannot be any longer in an enclosed compartment. It has to be on the outside external portion of your aircraft. So there you go. All it says, it has to be legible, and must be affixed to the aircraft by any means necessary to ensure that it remains affixed for the duration of each operation. Personally, I use a dyno label maker, put my FAA registration number on it, and stick it to the undercarriage of my quad, but that's just me. So
yeah, I had some wise guys at an AMA club tonight talking about using infrared, and they were getting all sorts of cute. So, but I think to me, it's not much of a difference from what was in place that allowed, that asked for the registration number to be somewhere on the craft. Just it was possible to be inside of a compartment that didn't require tools, and that's what they've changed.
yeah, and I mean, honestly, the only part that really kind of bugs me is those that reproduce like historical, specific, model aircraft or stuff like that, and now they have to mar it up with their FAA registration number. But I mean, beyond that, I don't see it as a huge deal. I don't know if anybody else does. There were a couple comments in the Facebook that they weren't going to do it. I get that. I just wouldn't want to be caught without it, I think.
I agree, it's really not a big deal, but their justification for it seems a little bit of a stretch, in my opinion.
Agreed. And to Zoe's point on and to yours as well, Dan. Like, oh, I'll just take a picture of this, and then this will be the FAA tag I'm going to use, and that's like a little too easy.
So I'm going to kind of wind it down. Are there any questions that anybody has? And it could be related to anything, could be related to the topic, could be related to the FPVFC, anything that I or we can answer for you.
I just want to say it's been a while since I've been in one of these meetings, and it's good to hear about like all the ideas instead of just sitting around and talking about money. So you guys are doing awesome. Thank you.
Oh, believe me, we got a lot of stuff coming, and hopefully we can definitely show the value of that stuff to you guys, to the community. We've been hard at work getting all this stuff put together. So
nice. I just wanted to say thanks. I hope that came across correctly and by what I meant.
Absolutely, it sure
Thank
did.
you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No problem.
So if your quad is under 250 grams and that's all you fly, then no, you don't need to register, and no, you don't need to put your obviously if you're not registering, you won't have a registration number. So no, if it's under the 250 gram limit for registration, obviously not. No, you won't have to.
So the under 250 gram is going to be more popular than it is today. That's the limit, a weight limit that Canada has selected. It's a weight limit that and I get it, mass limit that the European Union has selected, and it's also the FAA has picked up on the 250 gram as a Category 1, Category 2, Category 3 split. So those of you a little more technically inclined, there's a kinetic energy threshold for Category 2 and 3. The heavier drones or UAVs, UASs, and 250 gets underneath that. So there is no kinetic energy threshold. It's 11 foot-pounds for the first category 2, which is above 250 grams. So that's going to be a magical number around the world. So I think we can expect more innovation in that space.
Yeah, I definitely think that's coming, and I know late it's really exploded, that the micro quads, and personally I am building a micro wing right now. So different stuff to test out what we can do with smaller and lighter. So go ahead, Dave.
No, I was just chuckling with good comments on the chat. I love it.
So, well, if there's no other questions, I am going to wrap this up. Now, I'm going to have Stymie is going to drop our social media channels, so both all Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that kind of stuff. We are going to be pushing announcements to all of those. So whatever your poison of choice is with social media, keep a watch on those. We are going to be doing these meetings. As of right now, we're going to keep it to Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. And we will be holding one next week as well. And yeah, I think that's about it. Dave?
Nothing else. Thank you, everyone. And I think you get a tone of the philosophy we're adopting to try to both be benevolent and collaborative. Benevolent with our FPV community and collaborative with the FAA, and that's the negotiating tactic we're looking to try to take. So that seemed to resonate with this group, and thank you very much.
So before I wrap up, a couple of things that we are working on. We are going to revamp this Discord channel. We're going to open it up a little bit, so it's not just rules, regulations, safety guidelines, all that kind of stuff. We're going to open it up as a kind of, it's going to kind of act as our forums that we can utilize, that anybody can utilize to come in here and discuss. I know there's a lot of Discord channels out there. I know that there's places that everybody likes to go for their questions. We want to kind of turn this into a resource for everybody. So look for a little bit of renovation happening in the near future. And feel free to hit me up, hit Stymie up, Dave up, any of us up if you have any questions. Stymie's got something in the chat. Which do you prefer, Discord or Twitch? Would you prefer these were video streams? Is it easier for you guys to get on Twitch? Is Discord working for you guys?
If you want to do video meetings, I have the UFDA crew Zoom account, and I pay for it, so we can always use that. I can screen cap it and export it to wherever you want, as long as there's a stream key.
Okay, that's definitely an option. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you offering that.
No problem. It works on mobile. It works on PC and Mac. No app needed unless you're the host.
Okay, awesome. So Stephanie, take note on that and see what we can work out with that. Dave, anything else, bud?
Nothing else for me. Thank you.
All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Feel free to reach out to us if you guys need anything or you have questions or you just want to chat. All right, have a great night, guys.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Love it, dub.
Bye, guys.
Night, you guys.